Hey everyone, I hope you're having a nice time. I'm over here and I've got my Harry Potter drawing here. And to be honest, I didn't really plan out this drawing ahead of time. I've been doing similar drawings like these for a little bit for the past few days, and I thought, hey, this would be a good time for me to maybe sit down and crank out like a drawing, painting that I've been wanting to do that's been kind of in my head this entire time. I guess I'll start off with my materials, what I've been using. Right now, that sketchbook is just like the cheapest watercolor sketchbook I could possibly find. I think it cost me like $5 to give me like, something like 20 pages of watercolor paper. My pencil is quite literally a pencil I just found somewhere. I think I might have found it at the office somewhere. I was just in a meeting, I didn't have a pencil, and there was like a pencil on the desk of my office, and I picked it up and I've just been carrying it around with me, and it just ended up being part of this project. Of course, I'm using the Staedtler eraser. I don't always use that one. I've got some regular cheapy erasers that I may or may not have stolen from my office as well. And right now, as you can tell, I'm just doing the line art. I'm just going through. I'm doing sketch work. I didn't really have much of an idea of what I wanted to do, but I had an idea of what I might want to try and put down on paper. So for this one, I knew I wanted to get all three characters. I wanted to get Harry, Hermione, and Ron in this one. I just didn't know how, and it's been a while since I've done watercolors, so just to start off, I want to do something fun, something I'm used to, which is why I'm starting off with the pencils. I know a lot of people, they tend to do just like, gradients, or they'll put a wash down on the paper first, and then they'll put pencil on top of that, and they'll put another layer of paint on top of that. Personally, I just feel really, really uncomfortable doing watercolors right now. So I want to start off with something really, really easy, simple, comfortable, and that for me is just going to be the pencil work. Now here I'm right about done with the pencil work. I'm just going in, I'm adding some details. One thing that I was having a little bit of trouble with was the hair, and I knew I wanted to make their hair a little bit more, I guess, different. When you look at the series, when you look at the movies, realistically Ron and Harry, they don't have much of a difference in haircut. And I knew I wanted this one to look a little bit more, I guess, Japanese anime inspired, so I tried to work a little bit more of that into Harry's hair. I tried to work that into Ron's hair, and eventually when I looked at it, without color, just the pencil work, I was starting to realize that they really look similar. So I wanted to make sure that wasn't the case. I started going back and I started working in on Harry's body a bit more. I started trying to make his pose a little bit more dynamic. And I knew that Ron, for one thing that I kept on coming back to, was Ron looked a little too small on top. I know he was supposed to be far away from the viewer. He's supposed to be further away from the camera, if you will. But I wasn't entirely sure how to work that in. And eventually I got it right. Eventually I got to the point where I was like, okay, this is coming out to a point where I'm okay with it. Again, when I go back with watercolors, I eventually end up going back and forth on like how to shape their faces, how to shape the shadowing, everything like that. But right about here, I'm just fine-tuning the pencil work. I'm getting ready, and I'm starting to get to a point where I'm like, okay, this is going to be something that I'm going to feel comfortable painting. Yeah, right there. For the most part, Hermione didn't require that much work. I had a general idea of what kind of pose I wanted her to be. Again, I want all three of them to look very distinct, very different. I knew I was going to do a lot of that with the color work, with how I was going to express spells coming off their wands. But eventually I decided, Hermione should, at first I thought maybe have a book or an orb or something in front of her, something that makes her kind of stand out from the others. And then later on I decided, the way that I want to do it is I want to change the way that her magic expresses itself, and that it comes out a little bit more tight, a little bit more formed, maybe even a little bit more vibrant, whereas maybe Harry's is going to look a little bit more wild, and Ron's is just going to look kind of out of control and like incredibly powerful. But at the same time, I want Hermione's to look tight and vibrant and in control. So to do that, I decided I'd have her use both her hands in her spell, whereas both Ron and Harry are basically using one hand to control their wand and just one hand on their spells. Hermione is actively using both her hands to control the spell, to shape the spell, and kind of make her look like she's a little bit more in control than the other two are. Now you're going to start seeing me pull out my brushes and my paints. Again, I'm using the Mijello silver class mission paints. Come to 24 colors. For me, that's more than enough. I don't end up using all of these colors. A lot of them I just leave in the box. I also pulled out some Faber-Castell color pencils, but I don't actually end up using watercolor pencils usually because I still don't know how to use them. I can barely use watercolors as it is. After that, I do pull out my brushes. My brushes are the cheapest brushes I can possibly get. They're just some brushes I picked up at an art box near my house. Until I start getting better and a little bit more confident in this, and until I get to the point where, hey, these brushes are maybe not as good as I need them to be a better painter, to produce better work. Until I get to that point, I'm just going to continue using these paints and these paint brushes. Now, I start in right away with the skin. The skin tone's the first thing I work on. That's true for anything that I do, whether it's digital or whether it's paint or whether it's oil, water, color pencil, everything. I usually end up working with the skin tones first. In this one, I don't know about you guys, but personally, I like the idea of Hermione not being Caucasian. I just kind of like that concept. And it's not something that I started off with, but it's something that once it was mentioned to me while I was reading the books, it made perfect sense. So I tried to make her skin tone a bit darker. She doesn't have to be black. She can be, Hispanic. She can be something else. But I didn't want her to just be, I didn't want the painting to just be 3 Caucasian characters. Now, one thing that I kind of regret doing is I go in straight away with the black. And the black is usually the color that I go last with. But with watercolors, I've heard from different places, I've heard my mom say that she starts off with the darker colors first, not shading, just the darker colors first. So I thought I'd give that a shot. I don't think it ruins the painting, but honestly, I had to go back a few times with the black. I wasn't entirely sure what I was doing. Again, with these colors, I'm kind of sticking to the baseline colors of what you might see as their costumes in the movie. They're wearing like their kind of black cardigans, black pants, maybe a button-up dress shirt, and then Harry and Hermione, you can kind of see the hint of the tie, but Ron, his back is a little bit more faced to the camera, so you don't see that as much. Now, when I go in with the black, I have no idea what I'm doing. If you look, you can already tell that, Harry's cardigan is already pretty dark, Hermione's is much lighter, and then Ron's is just gray. It doesn't even have a hint of black in it. So I didn't know what I was doing here. I just kind of went in and I kind of did my thing. Eventually, Harry's, I start to realize it's gonna lighten up. I can kind of fade it out a little bit. Ron's and Hermione's, I can darken, and this is kind of where I start to figure out what watercolors are gonna be like. This is the first watercolor painting I've done that I actually like, and that's because I started using all the tools at my disposal. I start starting off with a wash, a lighter color, then I start adding in shades. And I start adding a little bit more deeper shadows, and then I let it dry, and I'll go back in. I'll work into it wet, I'll work into it dry. Eventually, later on, you'll see me start using paper towels to kind of like dry and mop things up. But overall, this is the part where I start, figuring out values and gradients and things like that. Now, as far as color composition is concerned, I wasn't entirely sure what I wanted everyone's color composition to be. But as soon as I start working on this painting, I start to realize, okay, hey, Hermione's got the red hair in this one, kind of pinkish hair. Ron's got this orangish red hair, and then Harry's gonna have like this blue hair. And I start to think, okay, the spells are really gonna be what defines the drawing, what kind of controls the mood, the color balance of the drawing, of the painting. Because realistically, they're wearing the same clothes. It's black and white and a little bit of red on their tie. There's not much else going on here. So with that being said, I start to realize that the hair and the spells, skin tones less so, but the hair and the spells are really going to be where I can control what the painting looks like, what kind of feeling it gives off. And actually, once I start doing the hair, that's when I start getting a lot more of the feel going into it. That's when I start feeling a lot more what the painting's going to be like. Right now, I've got a little bit of skin tone going on, I've got the jackets going on, and eventually I start working in the pants. But when I've gotten to this point, I'm more or less not entirely sure where I'm going. I'm still very, very much confused. And this is one thing that I definitely would recommend if you start watercoloring, is that start off maybe doing a few different tones at a time, but eventually you're going to want to hit that one thing that kind of makes your drawing or your painting pop out more. And here I start off with Ron's hair. Ron's hair I knew was going to be red. That's not going to change. That can't change, essentially. I can't do anything different about that because that's just what the character is. If I did anything slightly off with that, it would be something too much. It would change who the character seems like. Ron's hair I go into very, very little detail because he's the furthest away from the screen, away from the camera, if you will. A few brush strokes and he's pretty much done. Now, when it comes to Hermione and the rest of them, I'm really starting to touch up the colors a little bit more. This could be a little bit more depth because they're closer to the camera, because they're closer to you. You're going to be able to see more of them. So there has to be more of a gradient. There has to be a light and a dark. There has to be white in there. If there isn't, then it's going to look too flat. It's not going to look like what you choose watercolors for. You want watercolors to have that kind of gradient. They want to bleed. And with Hermione's hair, I do a first run, I go back and I start adding more color into it. I start kind of changing the way the color works and hits on the hair. And eventually it comes out to a point that I like it. At first, I was very unsure about how it was going to turn out. But, Hermione, she's essentially everyone's favorite character when it comes to this book, when it comes to this series. So for her, I really want to emphasize that, her hair looks great, her skin is a little bit different. She has to look the part. For me to just personally be okay with this painting, she was going to be the main part of the painting. Now, mixing colors, everything like that, I've got like that little color map on the side. That isn't as much a color map as it is me just testing whether or not these things work. I'm actually painting this on the back of another painting that I did that I really did not like. I was just inking and drawing on the other side, and I really didn't like the way things were turning out. I was really concerned with how bad it was turning out, and eventually I just cut it out and I gave up. I didn't want to waste the paper. Again, I've only got 15-20 sheets on this pad, and I'm still not sure if watercolors are a thing that I'm going to be consistently doing. But I definitely was thinking in the terms of, I don't want to waste paper, I need to keep this up. And at least the paper hadn't warped too much on this side to the point where I couldn't use it. Now here I start going in with Harry's hair. Harry's hair's got a little bit of blue in it. I'm not sure if you can tell from this angle or with this camera. But Harry's hair is a little bit more dark. It definitely has to have more presence because he's the closest to the camera. He has to look like, he has to look like he has darks. He has to look like you can see where the light is hitting him. He has to look like where you can see the light isn't hitting him. And because of that, I start working a little bit more detail into his jacket. I start working a little bit more detail into his hair. His face, surprisingly enough, just the way that the watercolor paint dried up, gave it depth that I didn't have to really go back and touch it up at all. One concern for me is I didn't add his glasses. I didn't do his glasses and I didn't do his scar. But I think if I add the glasses, that would be more than enough. I think the scar would be too much. And this is kind of where I start going flying back and forth now. Like, the spells are obviously going to be one of the last things I work on for this thing. I knew that to begin with. I definitely want to get the skin tone right. I want to get the pants right. I want to get the shirts right. I want to get the hands and everything else right before I really start going, okay, let's start working in on the spells. Because the spells are going to really make the painting pop, but they're also, to a certain degree, the least important aspect of the painting. The most important aspect are going to be Harry, Hermione, and Ron. They're the main characters. They're going to be who everyone's looking at. They're going to be the ones who everyone's going to look at and immediately have to recognize, that's Harry, that's Ron, and that one's Hermione. So I start working on Harry's tie. I start working in a little bit on their skin tones, just making sure that they have that depth, they have that shadow, they have all that going on before I start hitting in heavy on their spells. And realistically, their spells are really just cherry on top. They're going to kind of, right now I'm working on Harry's spell, it's a bit of the blue. That one's going to kind of distinguish, it's going to be used as more of like a device that I use to distinguish the characters. It's not necessarily there to define the characters. Now with Hermione, I want to go with a little bit of a pink, just because it's more vibrant and it'll catch your eye. Like, whenever I look at this painting, Hermione's the one that my eye draws straight to, and I wanted everyone else to have that same effect. So when I used Hermione's spell, I chose a color that would just right off the bat be more vibrant, be brighter, just be more, I guess, eye-catching compared to Harry's or Ron's, because I knew that Harry's and Ron's would comparatively be bigger than Hermione's spell, just because I want to make sure that that wild, that kind of untamed, that kind of unpracticed nature really showed through. So Ron, as you can see there, his just looks like a flame. His looks like he's just breathing flame out of his wand. Harry's you can't really see from this angle, you will later on, but it looks more like a smokiness, like as if it's just kind of like just sitting and cooking, whereas Hermione's just looks completely uncontrolled. You've got this tight half moon around her wand, and it kind of goes down to this energy ball that's floating above her hand, and that is kind of for me, it kind of defines the picture right there. Now, I can't be sure if you guys can tell from the camera angle and the quality of the picture, but between this clip and the last clip, I erased all the line art for the most part. I kind of regret doing that just because I think it takes away a little bit from the painting. A lot of these paintings with watercolor, you'll see a little bit of the pencil work left in there, and I kind of like that. This one, I haven't decided yet if I should ink it and give it actual solid lines. Of course I'd play around with the light. If it's a bright spot, there would be a little bit less line work there. If it's a darker spot with shadows, be a little bit more detail with the line work there. But for this one, I haven't really decided. This one right now, I've erased all the line work with the pencil. I'm going back through and I'm kind of adding a little bit more depth to the picture. I'm giving their spells a little bit more light and dark. I'm giving their shirts a little bit of shadow, so they're not just pure white, so they kind of pop off the background a little bit. And I think the painting turned out pretty well. You can see I'm slowly going back and I'm going to start working shadows into the clothing. I'm going to start testing out a few other colors. And overall, it looks kind of like a lot of the anime artwork that I used to look at when I was in high school or in middle school. And it kind of reminds me of that with a lot of the kind of the DC Marvel watercolor art that I've seen here and there in some of the comic books that have been coming out. Maybe, I don't know, I want to say like 5-10 years ago. And in general, I really like the way the painting turned out. I hope you guys too. If you guys have any questions, feel free to ask in the comments. Again, this has been with minimal supplies. I think all of the supplies, with the exception of the watercolor paints themselves, all of the supplies I used on this thing maybe cost me about $15-20 bucks. Of course, I have more paper, but realistically, I mean, I could have probably done this with supplies that range closer to $5 or $10 instead. And that's it. If you guys have any questions, feel free to leave them below. If you guys have any requests, please drop by my Twitch, my Instagram, my Patreon, my Twitter, my Tumblr. Heck, I'm everywhere. If you've got any questions, if you got any requests, feel free to look for me, find me, and just leave me a comment. Until then, if you guys like this, hit the like. If you guys didn't, hit the dislike. If you guys are on the fence about it, well, tell me. It's been a lot of fun, and I hope you guys come back next time. Bye.